to our annual meeting of Wyndham World Affairs Council. It is an honor to have all of you here. You will be hearing one of the best speeches that Wyndham World Affairs Council has been offering during the past 54 years. And I am glad you're all here. Some of you who were full members also enjoyed an Iranian dinner cooked by my wife. The dessert, salad, and many other things were brought by other members of the group, for which we are also grateful. So, just as a little advertisement, those of you who want to join our dinners, become a member. The cost is price of a hamburger. That's all. So let me just let you know that our next program would be introducing Iran through films. As you know, we had a film series on Cuba, and that was very successful. We learned a lot about that country. The truth about the country, its people, its culture. The same thing is needed about Iran, another country with a history, some 4 or 5 years, 1,000 years, misrepresented by the press. They forget to segregate the government, which is run by a bunch of fanatics, to the people who produce Rumi, Sadi, Hafez, and other great scholars and philosophers who have promoted love and peace through their literature. The Iranians follow that group of culture and the poets and not the government. Unfortunately, they took over by revolution, and the press does not explain that, so when you hear somebody from Iran, they all get excited. So we will hope to show that country and its culture through film next time. That is our advertisement. Today I have the honor and pleasure of introducing our speaker, Professor Amer Latif, Professor of Religion at Marlboro College, one of our great institutions here in Vermont, with diverse and loving faculty and students. I was very happy to know the member of the faculty and their achievement in that field of human history. Permit me to let you know a little bit about Professor Latif. When he left his country, Islamabad in Pakistan, after Latif hoped to find some answer to his many questions about the universe, he first looked for answers in science, studying physics as an undergraduate. Then he ran to Rumi, an Iranian philosopher and a Muslim scholar in Iran of the 13th century, who had been promoting love and peace through his literature. Well, Professor Latif found himself driven by desire to know the deeper significance of things. During his graduate studies, he sought answers in the writing of Rumi, the Persian philosopher in the 13th century. As I said, a Muslim scholar and mystic. Dr. Amer, completing his doctoral dissertation on the great subject, Quranic narrative of pharaohs by Rumi. Well, objectives of our speaker has been and is great. As a professor of religion, Dr. Latif has a goal to allow students to understand different religions through the combined use of art, literature, ethnography, and historical studies, and he teaches all of that with great deal of love. What has he achieved? It is a great deal. Professor Latif's approach removes the anger, the hate, the negative messages of religion, and adds the loving part of each religion. This is what Rumi did in 13th century, and this is what many other Iranian poets have done to get hate, fear, anger out of religion and bring love. I am very honored to have learned that there are musicians in our community that have decided to merge great classical music of Beethoven, Mozart, Rachmaninoff, all the great classical music, merge it with jazz and create more beautiful music. Then this professor of music, Eugene Friesen, professor of music and composer, who gives concert here, has decided to add to that Asian music, Middle Eastern music, and Latin music. And if you, ladies and gentlemen, had attended his concert last week in the Church of Stone, you would not have left that church, wanted to hear his music. And that is what he did, bringing music of all national history together and making something more beautiful. Well, here Professor Latif is doing the same thing. He is making all the beauty of all religions, and he is teaching it to everyone, and he is going to share his thought, his views, how we could have more beautiful world, beautiful society by understanding the positive aspect of religion and forgetting about the nasty things that we have in here and there. So with this introduction, permit me to invite our Vermont Rumi, Professor Latif.
It's kind of hard to follow that up with anything. So, thank you, Ishaq and Rose and everybody else who has invited me to give this talk, and it is a real pleasure. It always is to speak in the community, to see friends and neighbors, and today I also have my sister visiting from Pakistan who's here, so it's a really lovely coming together of different parts of my life. I thought when Ishaq asked me to speak about Islam and peace, I had in mind initially a very scholarly kind of endeavor where I would go over various forms that peacemaking has taken and the kind of work that different Muslim thinkers have done. And then I stepped back from it and I realized that this talk was falling in the month of Ramadan. It's about to end. And Ramadan is considered to be the month of light and the month of peace. So I thought it would be appropriate actually to focus on a piece I had written in December, sitting in front of our Christmas tree in our house, called An Islamic Christmas Tree. So yes, it's June, but you know, this is the month, Islamic month of light, so I think it's appropriate that I share the Islamic Christmas tree at this time. So I want to do a couple of things. What I would like to do is just share a little bit of my journey. Ishaq has alluded to it, and how I approach this, how I came to and how I approach the idea of making peace beyond simply religious difference, but at different domains. Then I would like to do the reading of this little reflection. It's a short reflection, about a page long, called An Islamic Christmas Tree. And after that, the second part of the talk is, very recently, over the last year or so, especially since the election season started, the last election season, it was a time of cognitive dissonance. Lots of things were not making sense. And I had to kind of move out and try and find folks who would allow me to make sense of the kind of contradictions I was seeing around me. And the most coherent account I found was in cognitive science, and specifically in the work of Lakoff, who is credited with writing one of the most important books on metaphor theory, metaphors we live by. So his work and the kind of work he has done is going to inform the second part of my talk. And then we'll just conclude, and depending on if there's appetite for it at that moment, perhaps I can reread that talk or the little piece I've written now with that insight of the cognitive science in place. So, as Isaac pointed out, I came to the States, and like many countries that were colonized, I think to those who have grown up in former colonies, they would appreciate the fact that, one of the diagnoses, and I think it was correct in part and incorrect in other part. Part of the diagnosis was the reason why we were colonized was because we didn't have enough science. So unfortunately, for countries with such a rich culture as he was talking about, that there's one Shakespeare, I think I would say there's at least like 18 Shakespeares in Persian. Literally, there's not an exaggeration. An uninterrupted literary tradition for 1,000 years that everybody has access to. The language has not changed. This is just the Persian tradition, which was a language of culture throughout the Balkans to the Bengal complex. So if the diagnosis is that we were colonized because we didn't have enough science, what was the answer to it? Put all of your bright minds into science, engineering, medicine, computers, whatever. So I was definitely part, and it still continues, but I was part of that push by parents, by society, study science. Science has the answers. So I took it on faith, But lucky for me, I was able to come to a liberal arts college. I went to Bard College, and liberal arts allowed me to explore other questions as well. And one of the things that I discovered was that science had no answers for some of the deepest questions that were most meaningful to me. That in terms of my happiness, it helped me understand the world, the physical world. I was a physics student, but there were many things that were of deep personal concern that there was just not an answer. So one of the big takeaways for me of being a physics major in undergraduate was that I found out the limits of science. It was a hard-earned lesson, but it was very important. So in some ways, the process of what I'm doing right now, what I'm going to share with you, really began at that moment. It was making peace between science and everything other than science. Science is the unofficial religion of our civil society, of our secular society. So how do I square this way of looking at the world, this way of making sense with those other things which are so important, poetry, music, the finer things that cannot be measured. How does one deal with that in a way that is still rigorous, that still does justice to the things that we are dealing with and to one's own experience of those things? So very much I think it began at that moment for me, and it has continued. And in a broader sense, I would say that my goal has been, and what I've been attracted to, and what I found in Rumi and Ibn al-Arabi, another 13th century great Islamic philosopher, mystic, poet, theologian, I will read some of his poetry today, were ways of holding multiple things together that might at one level seem contradictory, but they were able to provide a frame in which these contradictions could be held without them clashing with each other. That's what I realized, what I was looking for. So, the body and the mind. How do we overcome that divide between the body and the mind? What about feelings? What do feelings have to tell me about meaning? Do feelings carry truth? What kind of a truth is it? And how does it square with, scientific truth? How can I hold both of them together? So that, if I reflect back, and right now I continue as a teacher at Marlboro, this is my goal as well, is to help people and students bring together, and I'm constantly trying to do this myself, these various strands of human experience and ways in which humans have approached the world and the ways in which humans have made sense of the world and created knowledge and hold them together. A lot of them are contradictory. A lot of them seem to really, critique each other and negate each other even. But there are ways of holding it together. So that's my interest. That's my interest. And that's what really attracts me, and that's what excites me. And so some of that I want to share with you today. So I will begin with a poem, from Ibn al-Arabi. He was a prolific writer in the 13th century. But I will share from one of his collections of poetries called the Tarjumanul Ashwaq, which means the translator of desires, or the translator of yearnings, or the translator of longings. And the reason why I'm beginning with this, you'll see where we begin and where we end. But there's something about this longing, or yearning, or a desire for peace. It starts as a desire, and we need to pay attention to that. Before we start talking in abstract terms about it, we need to pay attention to where in our body it begins. What does it feel like? What is it reaching out towards? This notion of longing, right? I mean, the meaning is right there in the word. We are reaching out, we're longing ourselves, we're reaching out to something. What is it in us that reaches out? So this is Ibn Arabi's love poetry. He is longing for something. Gentle now, doves of the thornberry and moringa thicket, don't add to my heartache your sighs. Gentle now, or your sad cooing will reveal the love I hide, the sorrow I keep covered. I echo back in the evening, in the morning, echo, the longing of a lovesick lover, the moaning of the lost. In a grove of Gada, spirits wrestled, bending the branches down towards me, leaving me undone. They brought yearning, breaking of the heart, and other new twists of pain, putting me through it. Is there someone waiting for me in Jam, or the stoning ground at Mina? Who for me at Tamarisk Grove, or the way station of Naaman? Hour by hour, they circle my heart in rapture, in love ache, and touch my water, my earth, my fire, with a kiss. They swore how often they'd never change, piling up vows. She who dyes herself red with henna is faithless. A white-blazed gazelle is an amazing sight, red dye signaling, eyelids hinting. Pasture between breastbone and innards, oh marvel, a garden among flames. My heart has become capable of taking any form. For gazelles, a meadow, a cloister for monks. For the idols, sacred ground. Kaaba for the circling pilgrim. The tables of the Torah, the scrolls of the Quran. I profess the religion of love wherever its caravan turns along the way. That is the belief, the faith I keep. So when I came across this poem, something really clicked for me. Something about the resolution of certain difficulties that might remain at the formal level, but that the resolution actually lies at a slightly deeper and informal level. For Ibn Arabi, he begins with the yearning for the beloved, for longing for the beloved. And what he is led to is a place where his heart, not the form, but something within the heart. I think the heart is being used in these pre-modern texts in the same way that the word heart is used in Chinese texts as well. It seems to be a commonality in pre-modern traditions where it's the heart that is the center of consciousness, not the mind. So in Chinese, heart-mind, the word xin, even the characters, the ideogram, is the heart and the mind together, heart-mind. That's what's being spoken over here. At the outward level, there are the idol worshippers, there's Muslims, there's Christians. And what I love about this poem especially is that it comes in through the way of the natural world, the way of the animals. First, his heart becomes a pasture for the gazelles. He's able to feel the yearning. I mean, why? What is it that drives a gazelle to pasture, an animal to eat, the longing for grass, for food. His heart is able to take that in. That's the container. My heart has become capable. Qabil is a container. It's able to hold all of this now. And I realize that that is the work. At the formal level, at the level of form, of course things, bump up against each other. I mean, no two people are alike. Even twins, right? Parents can tell them apart, even if they want to play tricks on them, But there is unity to be had. It's not at the level of form. It's at the level of the heart. And that's the work for each one of us, that we have to find ways so that we're able to expand our heart-mind, our place of consciousness, the place where we are able to hold things so that it's wide enough so that all of it can be held together. Even gazelles in a pasture, or a bear eating meat, or you can start through the entire world. This is it's a cosmic vision. It doesn't leave out the animal world. Religious difference is put in a cosmic context. There's no special way to deal with this unless you're able to feel the desire of the gazelle or the goat or those who are grass eaters. You will not be able to feel the desire of the pilgrim who's going to the Kaaba. It is the same desire. That multiplicity that appears in the beginning, birds are chirping, eating worms, something else is doing over there, human beings are doing their own thing, that is resolved at a certain level. It is desire. Desire is the cause. Love, self, and we're longing. This is the longing. Reaching out for grass, reaching out for worms, reaching out for food, reaching out for peace. The longing in us for peace. So we need to pay attention to that longing. That is meaningfulness. That is the beginning point. That's out of which, if that is the thread on which all of these various pearls need to be threaded, is the thread of our desire and our yearning. So, fast forward 12 or 15 or 20 years, I think, and I wrote this piece last winter, but I've been thinking about it for a long time. So here's my own kind of personal stab at making peace at least between two traditions. And it's called Light Upon Light, an Islamic Christmas Tree. It's written in December 2016 in Putney. My family has a Christmas tree, and at the end of the day, when all the lights in the house are turned off, I love to sit and contemplate the illuminated and decorated tree. Recently, a colleague was surprised to find this out, and to her question, "But you're a Muslim, how can you have a Christmas tree in your home?" My answer was simple. "You see, my Christmas tree is Islamic." The ensuing conversation that clarified her confusion is something I wish to share with you as well. We live in a world of resonances. A word or an image spurs a series of associations with its own path and momentum. Our imaginations, shaped by personal and collective histories, contain ambiguous and layered presences. Human, other than human, and more than human. Looking at an illuminated Christmas tree calls forth many presences for me. First, there is the tree, and I hear God's words in the Quran. A good word is like a good tree. Its roots are firm, and its branches are in the sky. It gives its fruit every season by the leave of its sustainer. God draws these parables for mankind so that they may remember. The good word makes me think of the way in which God describes Jesus in the Quran. When the angels said, "Mary, God gives you good news of a word from him, whose name is Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary. High honored shall he be in this world and the next, near stationed to God." I think of what God asks Muslims to say in the Quran concerning the whole chain of his prophets. We have faith in God and in that which has been sent down on us and sent down on Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, and Jacob and the tribes, and that which was given to Moses and Jesus and the prophets of their Lord. We make no distinction between any of them. To be asked by God to make no distinction between the prophets is God calling me to recognize that beyond the obvious differences of form, time, and place, there is an essential equivalence among the prophets. The reality of prophecy is the same, and hence all prophets are words of God. Now the Christmas tree transforms into a symbol of the prophet, and the lights within it take on the significance of Prophet Muhammad's famous prayer seeking illumination. O God, place light in my heart and light on my tongue, light in my ears, light in my sight, light above me, light below me, light to my right, light to my left, light in front of me, light behind me, and place light in my soul, magnify light for me, amplify light for me, and make me into light. O God, bestow light upon me, and place light in my nerves, light in my flesh, light in my blood, light in my hair, and light in my skin. Increase me in light, increase me in light, increase me in light, and grant me light upon light. Here I think of my mother, who answered the question of my 5-year-old self, what is God? With the answer, God is light. It was a profound answer, for God calls himself by that name in the Quran. God is the light of the heavens and the earth. The parable of his light is a niche, wherein is a lamp. The lamp is in a glass. The glass, as it were, a glittering star, lit from a blessed olive tree, neither eastern nor western, whose oil almost lights up, though fire should not touch it, light upon light. So I'm brought back to the Christmas tree, which is no longer just a lighted and decorated tree, but a symbol of the possibilities of human becoming. An illuminated and illuminating being with fruits and presents underneath, not comprehended by darkness. A possibility of going beyond our limits while still living within them. A possibility of transforming the duality of body and spirit, light upon light, which is neither Eastern nor Western and is therefore both. So, I think if I were to go back and analyze what I did there, was that I used reason and imagination together. Starting from a tree, thinking of associations in the Quran. What does the Quran say about trees? A tree, a good word is like a good tree, which then leads me to thinking about how Jesus is the Word of God. And Jesus is the Word of God, but Jesus is also a prophet. So there's an equivalence between Jesus and all the prophets, and hence all the prophets become words of God. And the light in the Christmas tree then makes me think of Prophet Muhammad. So if Prophet Muhammad is a word of God too, and Jesus is the word of God, and the tree is a word, and hence is now a symbol of a prophet, then an illuminated tree is the symbol of an illuminated human being. And immediately the prayer comes to mind out of the tradition. And from there, I move to the Quran, because God is the light of the heavens and the earth. So that's the other idea, through which I'm able to, through Quranic imagery and symbolism, move beyond East and West. But it's an East and West holding them together, I feel. God is a light. It's a non-dual perspective, but it doesn't do away with both. The body is there and the spirit is there, but both end up becoming very similar to each other. One reflects the other. So it's a way of holding them together that doesn't do away with their differences. Differences are maintained, and yet they are resolved at the same time. So reason and imagination working together, on scriptural data, but what it also gives shape to is, what I was saying, the longing and the desire, to be able to see that which is in front of you as part of yourself. There's a desire to know the other, to even become the other, in addition to knowing that we are separate from the other. And this is one method at the level of the heart, where one can, I feel, quite rigorously be able to move from one's own tradition, so I move from Islamic tradition based in the Quran and the words of the Prophet Muhammad, and we move to the tradition that is common to all of us, which is nature, trees. And it is finding that common ground which nature is functioning as that allows me to then come back to Christianity, coming out, Jesus as the word over there. So there's a way into our differences that can go through some of the things that we hold in common. And nature is definitely one of them, and our bodies is the other one. Longing, yearning, those are universal. And this is one of the things I think that I have learned most clearly in ways that I would always tell my students about the importance of images, the importance of paying attention to feelings in writing, and how to articulate one's feelings in logical writing, not to let it go. But the work of cognitive scientists like Lakoff, for example, it brings out very clearly how it is that it is our shared experience, which is the body, and the way in which we work in the world, that gives rise to certain basic metaphors. And metaphors not as figurative stuff, metaphors as the way in which we see things as. Warmth, for example. Warm is, we associate with good, because obviously when we were children, we were held, and we associate that with lovingness. And cold, we don't associate with very positive things. Up is good, down is not good. You know, I'm feeling up, I'm feeling down. There's a lot of, basic patterns at work over there. So these kinds of things are what he calls conceptual metaphors. And what it turns out that the findings of cognitive science really challenge some of our most cherished beliefs. And I think liberals, especially and progressives, need to really pay attention to what Lakoff is saying, because what he is challenging is our notion of a rational subject. So here in a little bit of kind of a synoptic form are some of the findings of cognitive science. The mind is inherently embodied. So mind, let's think of it in terms of heart-mind, that there's a neural basis for our thoughts and framework through which we look at the world. The thoughts that we have are associated with certain nerves firing, certain synapses connecting, and that forms a circuit. Every time we have that thought, that circuit is activated and is invigorated and strengthened. So with repetition, things can become second nature almost. But there is that physical basis for it, which also means that there's a way in which our yearnings and our desire also play a part in making meaning. And most thought is actually unconscious. By some estimates, almost 98% of our thought. Experiments have shown that we usually make our decisions much before they actually come to consciousness. Great work being done on that. And this is really key, that most thought is mostly unconscious, because this goes against the ideas we have about the rational subject, the person who makes a reasonable choice without professing any kind of allegiance to any political ideology. I'm sure you must have noticed in the last election cycle, many a time in response to some crazy thing said by one person, that the person from another party, usually the Democrats or progressives, would be giving reams and reams of data to show why what had been said was just totally absurd. Did it work? Really, empirically speaking, obviously it did not work. So what does that tell us about how it is that the human mind works? That does not work in the way we think it does. We assume that everybody is rational, we have this choice, so if you give everybody the right data, they will just think their way to the right conclusions. No, that's just flat out wrong according to cognitive scientists. So Lakoff has a very funny line. He calls progressives science deniers. Because they deny cognitive science. So if folks on the right deny climate science, then there's an equal kind of a science denying camp over here to keep on treating people like and misunderstanding people. So this is really important, that most thought is unconscious, and that and that abstract concepts are largely metaphorical. For example, think about time. When was the last time we shook hands with time? It's an abstract thing. It's an experience. We have this experience. But we have this experience, or we come to know time through other things. That's the definition of a metaphor. To know something in terms of another thing. But so what are our metaphors for time? Time is money, right? The is the signal over there. That's not talking about a simple analogy or simile. It's not like time is like money. Time is money. We experience time as money, as a resource. Or time is like a flowing river. Time is a flowing river. It doesn't turn back. So our experience of these abstract things, which are fairly, palpable to us, yet that is mediated through these basic metaphors. Flowing river, common experience. Money, something that you can hold on to and can use and do something with. And there's other, examples over there as well. So the other thing that Lakoff points out also is that we can only understand what the neural circuitry characterizing our worldviews allows us to make sense of. So if we don't have the right container, like Ibn Arabi was talking about, my heart has become capable of taking every form. He did some work, or somehow some work was done on him, that he ended up having a neural network which was able to contain all of these things coming in. Otherwise, usually the container is such that you can pour the entire scene in, it's going to keep just that amount. And that's one of the ways in which cognitive scientists explain why it is that in spite of infallible evidence, people will not get convinced if it is presented to them, because somehow the worldview ends up almost like a neural container and things will not stick to it. So another way of thinking about this is that these worldviews are made up of conceptual frames through which we understand situations. So if you were to hear the word, pass me the menu, you would think you were in a restaurant. One word or one sentence, and immediately an entire range of experience is made available, and we're transported to that place immediately. So there's a way in which our whole worldview is made up of these many different kinds of frameworks. And something else that's really key, and I think Isaac was pointing to that a little bit, and that's why I'm not going to talk about it, but I'm actually doing what I don't want to do by saying I'm not going to talk about it, is that negating a frame only affirms it. So if you disagree with somebody, according to Lakoff, don't try and use their words to say what you are saying, X, Y, and Z is wrong. No, know that you disagree, give a positive image. Present your own understanding in a positive image rather than responding to their claim. Respond to, or just put forward your own positive image. And I think this is key here. Rather than talking about anger and hatred and stuff, what the implication here is build up strength. Build up stuff that actually counteracts that rather than directly looking at that thing. So one of the other last things from cognitive science that I wanted to mention was this idea of biconceptualism. Most people are neither totally progressive nor totally conservative, neither totally living in hatred nor living totally in love. Each thing has a little bit of the other. So most people we are biconceptual. So there's two kinds of conceptual frameworks there. What is interesting is that our brain knows how to deal with these by a process called mutual inhibiting. In one situation we might use, so for example, politically speaking, the example that he gives is that some of us are conservative about certain issues and progressive about other issues. There's no sort of like center point where everybody has the same views and that will be the middle. So depending on the situation, our perspectives will come out. So the way to make change, now we're getting this idea of promoting peace. The way to make change, according to him, and big changes, is to strengthen the ones that we feel like are more important. And part of that is not repeating the negative stuff, just really building the positive aspect, the direction we want to go in. So the more that is activated, the more it becomes normal. So repetition is important there. All kinds of other frameworks are important. So that's the method that I just tried to follow in my reading for you. It is to move from where I am. We move from there and we find those places in our traditions, whatever traditions they are. Whether we're talking about science versus religion, science versus some other thing, whether it's romanticism versus, really rigorous, just intellectual method, whether it's religious stuff or whether it's politics. We need to find those values that we feel are central and start just building on them and keep building on them, because we cannot eradicate the other side. That's just the way of the world, so to speak. Peace a lot of times means simply learning to live together, and most of us, I think, have really found a way to make peace at some kind of a family gathering. An uncle or somebody else that you totally disagree with, we find some common ground, right? There's a lot of wisdom there. We know a lot of this stuff. Sometimes reading cognitive science, I feel like, yes, we knew this, awesome, so now you're proving it, great, But we know this, there's really not much that is revolutionary other than it really giving us more trust Before, we in a secular society have science as our faith, right? So we can have faith in science now. You know, you don't have to have faith in, whatever, thousands of years of human history where, folks like Rumi or Sisi or other folks, they've shown a way forward is focus on beauty. Focus on beauty, leave no space for hatred. That's the method. I am a student of religions and also specifically mysticism, and one of the things that I remember really struck me, and this is early on when I was reading some spiritual manuals, and there's question and answers between teachers in Sufi tradition, and a student asked a teacher, I'm having all of these thoughts, these negative thoughts and this and that, what should I do? Pay no attention. Do something beautiful. Starve it off the energy. And this is basically, I've just shared with you the science of that. We can map it neurally or we can just map it psychologically. Either way, that is the principle here. So how do we make peace between conflicting traditions? We have to find resources in whatever our tradition is that is big enough, wide enough to hold multiplicities and follows the logic of both and. It's not either or, either this or that. Yes, it's both dissimilarity. There are ways in which, like Islam and Christianity, I've found a way to connect them. But Muslims, by definition, will never accept the divinity of Christ. That it would no longer be Islam then. That's not going to happen. So I'm not worrying about that. I'm trying to find ways in which we can see each other. That yes, we are also similar. We are different and we are similar. It's that the other part which needs to be strengthened. And this has resonances across many domains. I see my learned friend back there, Mark, visiting us from his parish. We've had long conversations about this. This idea of God's transcendence and immanence, God's presence and absence in theology, God's nearness and God's distance. The logic is both and. And that religions just come out and say it. In the case of Christianity, you have the ultimate paradox. Both human and divine at the same time. God is both present and absent. But what do we end up focusing on? Distance, God's rigor and severity, or the fact that God says, I forgive everything. My mercy precedes my wrath. Why not build that as a central value? So that's where the work is, I feel. First of all, in a logic of both and, strengthening, finding resources, a narrative, a frame that is big enough to hold them. I think a both and logic does it, and holding them together while saying, yes, we disagree, but at the same time, look at all of this great stuff too. Inevitably, that would be one way. It might not be total harmonization, but I think that's one kind of peace making. So, right. And I can just, personally speaking, share one more thing with you. It's much nicer as well to spend your time finding common ground, rather than looking at differences. Differences are always there, Even one person by oneself from day to day. You have to look at myself yesterday, what I was saying. What am I saying today? We can't even find, congruity and a sense of, continuity with ourselves, something that we know so carefully. So this applies also within our own beings as well, this principle. Not to get overcome by a negative thing. Yes, you've done it, something negative, something falling short, but look at the positive as well at the same time. So I think this principle has application at many, many different levels. So that's my talk. I promise it would be a short talk, so I think that there's time for some questions and answers if folks are,
Please do make your question brief and short, so everybody who has questions can have a chance to get an answer. So please have your questions.
Ishaq's doing a great job of putting me under pressure and answer what was left. A comment, Ishaq. Please.
So I really appreciate the premise of the positive and beauty and nature. I'm noticing as you spoke that you quoted only one woman, and that is your mother.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what your perspective is about the divine feminine in your studies and in the support of this premise.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that's another level of peacemaking that each one of us has to do.
Could you repeat the question?
The question was, what is my perspective on the role of the divine feminine in peacemaking, I guess, or am I representing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In your vision of having beauty and nature and
Yeah.
all these things that are manifestations. I mean, the nature is Mother Earth. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't get much more feminine than that.
Yeah.
But I'm not hearing that in any direct way, and so that's the question.
Yeah. I think one way in which this is work we all have to do, and I think Attar is this great Sufi poet, 12th century, and he wrote this great book called Mantiqut Tayr, the speech of the birds, in which birds reach out or set out to visit the Simurgh, the phoenix, their king. So it's an allegory of a soul's journey towards God. And he quotes this beautiful passage there, which I think really encapsulates my own feelings on it as well. And I feel like what the work we need to do, all of us. He said that on this path, when the fire of love strikes someone, on the journey towards the divine, when the fire of love strikes someone, if you're a man, you will give birth to a woman. And if you're a woman, you will give birth to a man. Can it be denied? Can it be denied that Mary gave birth to Jesus and that Eve came out of Adam's side? Which for me was a total turning around of even the story of Adam and Eve, because that's usually read as this derivative kind of a thing. But what he has done is taken that to point out that there is this complementarity. Each one of us has to work on the other side. Yeah. So that's a kind of a making peace. Men have to make peace with the divine feminine, and women have to make peace with the divine masculine within. So it's both. It's a two-way street. So each one of us is, set with that task. So that's. I cannot say it any better than that. I feel like that's the work. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yes, please.
If you had to look at Rumi from the standpoint of one person like Christ and another person like Moses, would you say that Rumi is more like a prophet leader or more like a lawgiver?
Yeah. So the question is, if I would look at Rumi, is Rumi more like Moses, like a lawgiver, or a prophet figure, like Jesus? Yeah. This really gets to the heart of Islamic self-understanding. And Rumi, coming in the lineage of Islamic friends of God, Islamic saints, is inheriting from Prophet Muhammad. And the distinction that Prophet Muhammad says of himself is that he brings together all of the wisdoms of the prophets before him, which is symbolically represented when on his journey towards God, he was taken from Mecca to Jerusalem and he led all the prophets in prayer. So there's a way in which, spiritually speaking, there are different categorizations of Muslim saints. So your question, is great because, it allows us to think of this way in which Islam understands itself. So you can be a mosaic Islamic saint. You can be a Jesus-like Islamic saint. You can be a Zechariah-like Islamic saint. So these prophets become types for a spiritual path. And then different people talk about, and Rumi is definitely one of them, who might go through different stages of that. So the way I think, if I can be presumptuous, I think Rumi would say that when I need to discipline somebody, I am like Moses. And when I try to comfort somebody, I am like Jesus. It is not an unchanging aspect. It is really the flexibility and responding to the situation as it is. with all the resources of all the prophets and the entire range of the divine attributes. So the basic idea of God's nearness and distance, God's gentleness or God's severity, law and love. You know, there's love in law as well, and there's some laws of love too. The beloved demands certain things of us. So that's the way in which Islamic wisdom tradition thinks of itself and approaches these questions. That it's a moving, flexible situation where for analytical purposes, we can have these, but let's not get stuck with them. There is no, like Moses was a pretty loving guy too, right? I mean, in that way, and that the law was given with a certain intention, lovingly, for a certain people at a certain time who needed perhaps law. I mean, so there's ways in which we can't, know everything, but there's a refusal to be pinned down to types and taking all the types, So in one day you could be, So this is one of the things that was very hard. I know at some conferences, like, some non-Muslim scholars of Islam find it very hard to see how it is that a person who is a lawgiver, like a judge in traditional Islamic society, you're a judge in the daytime, you get up for family, say goodbye to family, go and you preside over judgments. And in the evening, you go hang out with your friends, you might drink wine and participate also in listening to ecstatic music and stand up and dance and tear your clothes. And so one person in one day, and it looks like a contradiction. But the container is big enough, it holds it, there is no contradiction there. So anybody who's interested in this, I have to make a plug for it. One of the most important books in Islamic studies and religious history, it got the award from American Academy of Religion, is a book called What is Islam? The Importance of Being Islamic by the late Shahab Ahmed, who was a very dear friend and untimely death a year and a half ago. But he's dealing with this exact question. What is Islam? The importance of being Islamic, like the importance of being earnest. I think he's playing off of that. And what is the importance of being Islamic according to Shahab? The ability to hold contradictions. He coined the term Balkans to Bengal complex. And this is his main thesis, which is obvious to those who grew up there, that in this region, there's a range, a variety, and people are able to hold contradictions, which look like contradictions from the outside, but are not contradictions. How is it possible, for example, he asks, that figural painting is prohibited according to, legal authorities, and yet you find the most gorgeous work done? Commandeered by people who ought to be upholding the law. No problem for them, obviously. Or that wine is prohibited according to the legal scholars, and yet it is the most important symbol and talked about thing in poetry. Wine, And there's plenty of Muslims who actually drank it as well, but that this is a kind of contradiction, which is very interesting. So Islam is a very interesting and important case for students of human history to see, and I think for us right now, that's why I chose a subtitle, The Importance of Being Islamic. We have something to learn from that, and that was my point today as well. How can we create a container that is big enough that these things don't feel contradictions, so that we don't feel troubled by the fact that I will never, accept Jesus as the Son of God, and yet I feel totally happy, and I can feel the passion of my Christian friends. That's the goal, yes. Yes, please.
Nearly 70 years ago, I was in Laluka in West Pakistan trying to learn Islam and about Islam. And one of my major sources of inspiration was the frontier Gandhi. One never hears anything about him now.
Yeah.
I wonder why.
Mahatma Gandhi, you saying? Frontier Gandhi, yes, Frontier Gandhi.
Muslim Gandhi.
I know. So he's referring to Badshah Khan, who was a friend of Gandhi's, some would say perhaps a disciple, and we usually associate a lot of martial characteristics to the Pathans, and yet he helped, at the pre-partition, the Pathans stage, non-violent, peaceful protests. Yeah. I mean, and the party that he founded was carried on by his son, and it's still around, ANP. But somehow that did not take as much root. But there was an effect of that, though. I feel somehow because of his influence, I think the literacy level in the frontier province is quite well compared to the rest of Pakistan. I think, why do we not hear enough about him? I actually also didn't know enough about him either. I think nationally speaking, just speaking for myself, I have some guesses. I think one of the guesses is that his association with Gandhi and Gandhi's association with India, per se, that made him suspect in the mind of more nationalist-minded folks, so that he was not given the importance that he really deserves. But I think, a time will come where people will bring it up. And there is a big movement. I met a person at SIT just recently who was a seminary student, 10 years in seminary, and then he got a PhD in peace studies. And he, in collaboration with some other folks, came up with the peace syllabus that is being taught in madrasas. So I think there's ways in which some of the needs are being met indigenously, and I think Bacha Khan's work most probably will find some expression there. But yeah, it's beyond that, I'm not sure. Yes. Adam?
I wanted to go back to your talking about metaphorical thinking again.
Yes.
Can you apply the idea of ours is not a caravan?
Can you speak up a little bit, please?
Can you apply to what's going on today and how we could see this? Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come yet again, come.
Yeah.
The whole thing of gold.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, what Adam is referring to is that if you go to Rumi's tomb in present-day Konya, Turkey, on the threshold, as you're about to step into it, there's a quatrain that's written up there, which is not Rumi. I think it was after him. But still, like his successors felt that it was representative of him, that's why they put it there. It goes something like this: Baz har anche hasti baz gar kafiro gabro bud parasti baz in dargahe ma dargahe naumidi neest sad bar agar tu be shikasti baz Baz is a word for also a hawk, who flies from the king's, wrist, circles and comes back. So Baz is come back. Baz har anche hasti, whoever you are, Baz come back. Gar kafir, if you are an infidel or truth denier. Gabr, if you are a fire worshipper. But parasti, an idol worshipper. Whoever you are, come back. In dargahe ma, this threshold of ours over which you're about to step is not a threshold of despair. This is not a threshold of despair, even if you have broken your intentions. Toba is really actually asking forgiveness. That you ask for forgiveness, like, oh, I did that. God, please forgive me. I will not do that again. Even if you've done that 100 times, come back again. Yeah. So that is totally strengthening that aspect of God's mercy. It says very clearly in almost all scriptures, I think. The Quran, it says, God forgives everything. He forgives everything. I mean, why not take that literally? Why only take literally when which God is saying that, fight or do something else like that? So it's a great example of we need to strengthen that aspect, and that's what people like Rumi are showing us that we need to do. He is, through his poetry, saying this is not a caravan, a threshold of despair. This is not a threshold of despair. You can always come in. You are always welcome. You are never gone enough. You're never far gone enough. You've never, no matter how low you are, you can come here. You can come here. And that is a human manifestation of the divine acceptance and divine forgiveness. Now imagine that heart. I mean, this is the call to us, these beings who are somehow able to live in that perspective of light upon light. I mean, think of, in the Quranic passage that I read, that God's light is neither of the east nor of the west. It's light upon light. So think of Jesus, what Jesus did, in his time. I think the west of the Pharisees, or the more legal-minded folks who wanted to stay away from the riffraff, was very, not very, kind towards the lepers and the prostitutes and those other people. So the west of that, and the east of this depravity and human suffering, he held it together. That's an example for me of somebody saying, this is not a threshold of despair. I think that's what the great beings are calling us. That's what their example is like. And that's what, in my mind, we all need to do at one level or another. At least at the level of the heart. at least at the level of imagination, even if you cannot bring somebody into your house, let us at least imagine their yearning. The gazelle in the pasture, their yearning. That's the starting point. That's the common ground. We have to be able to feel it. And that's what a Rumi feels, you know, that's what a saint feels. That's what Jesus feels. That's what Muhammad feels. And Muhammad was, you know, sent as mercy to all the worlds, each and every, you know, they talk about the bodhisattva. That is the Islamic idea of the bodhisattva, mercy to all the worlds. Mel.
You asked about looking for larger frameworks.
Yes.
And a framework which will allow the discussions and comments that we've had tonight to come in a very coherent way is one that's based on systems.
Yes.
Which in a nutshell would say that we have something called one, all there is, capital O-N-E, all there is. And then we have two, which emerges
from the one. Yeah.
As energy, matter, and consciousness. And then we can talk about also very, very, very high-level values like love, fear,
yeah,
and connectedness with the other,
right,
and connectedness with one, capital O-N-E.
Yeah.
And all the discussion, as I was listening, that you had, come in under that framework and are powerful in producing connectedness with one, all there is, and also are suggested and implied by oneness. And I wonder if you had any comment on that. That's the kind of thinking that I use, but I'm not sure. So
Mel's talking about systems thinking and, you know, the framework. I mean, I was reminded of Chinese cosmology as you were speaking, you know, from the one came out the two, from the two the multitude, 10,000 things came out. I mean, so the I Ching, right, or the Tao Te Ching, I think it talks about it.
Come out of Chinese thinking, came out of a generalization of what is a system, and how do we look for more encompassing values than the strictly operational practical ones. And some of them are things that you talked about, that you don't put numbers on.
Right.
And so on.
Yeah.
And the flow that goes between these values at higher and lower levels allows people to find common ground, like in different religions.
Yeah.
And it's very helpful to solve problems.
I agree. And I think I see systems thinking at work. For example, when Jesus says, have you not looked at the flowers or the lilies? It's breaking out of one's own thing and making flowers into teachers. I mean, that's a pretty amazing thought. Let the flower be your teacher. And in the Quran, God says, have you not seen how everything in the heavens and the earth glorifies God? The birds spreading their wings and, you know, talking about So Islam, they are all called Muslims. So this religion is a way of connecting with everything, if one were to pay attention. And I think Jesus in his own ways is saying the same thing. We have to learn from how the faith of a flower, the way it comes up and just opens, doesn't matter who's in power, right? Sorry, it's kind of hard to resist sometimes. Thank God, the flowers are still blooming. You know, they come up, they don't care. We need to learn something from that. They are our teachers, they are better than us. Human superiority needs to take a back seat in certain ways. We can pluck them and, you know, do whatever to them, but they have something up above us. Yes, please.
I'm a pastor from the Lutheran tradition.
Uh-huh.
And one of the criticisms of the predominantly white mainline church in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement was that many of our pastors wanted to begin to preach about healing and peace immediately. And skipped over more difficult conversations about justice or wrongdoing. And I wonder, these ideas of finding commonality, what do we do when there's a situation in which one group has been oppressed, and the dominant group maybe just wants to move straight to what we have in common or making things better? How do you see that sort of connecting to the ideas we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a personal struggle for me as well, and I think it's such a great question. Thank you for asking it. And some of my thinking on this is informed by Thich Nhat Hanh, wonderful Buddhist teacher, and especially his work on anger is just remarkable. I had never thought of it in that way until I read this book on anger by him, in which he says that please never go into your room if you're angry and put your head in a pillow and scream. He says you will just be rehearsing anger. And what do we know from cognitive science now? That is strengthening those neural pathways and activating those neural pathways. He gives a different image. He says you have to hold your anger softly like a baby. Soothe it. You just have to hold it, a crying baby, So when I hear discussions of this and the issues of that, I feel there's a need, absolutely, to discuss, but there's a place at which it becomes rehearsal. And we have to be really wary of that. That actually then stands in the way of healing. Maybe moving too quickly is problematic, and perhaps that's where some of the work needs to happen. At what pace to move? But no matter how aggrieved one is, if one wants to be free, one has to at a certain stage let go. So that is, it has to be clarified that is the goal at a certain stage. Otherwise, we are stuck. We will not move on. We will be stuck otherwise. So it's a great question. Thank you for asking, because I think it really shows some of the applications of the cognitive science that I tried to bring in.
There are some more questions, but before some more people leave, let me let everybody know that our next gathering is on July 27th. We will have a group of Palestinian students, Israeli students, and American students coming here after looking at a very great film discussing the issues in that part of the world and how can we bring peace in that area, which is exactly what we are hoping to do. So it is on the 27th. It will take place right here in this beautiful place, and I hope you put it in your calendar and you can join us here on the 27th of July. Okay, another question here, please.
Yes, please, yeah.
You spoke of flowers as teachers.
Yes.
I wonder if you could elaborate in the context of Rumi and his life, the role that Shams of Tabriz played.
Yes. So it's a fairly long discussion, I think. Shams, what we find, I think for me, the most illuminating insight into it comes from Shams's own words. So there's a book called Me and Rumi, which is a translation by William Chittick. I studied with him, Professor Chittick. Beautiful translation of some of Shams's words that were recorded. And Shams says that I had prayed to God. Shams was a really advanced, being. And he prayed to God. He said, make me friends with somebody else who can understand me. And he talks about how Shams was in Damascus and Rumi had gone to Damascus to study for a while. And he said, yes, I saw him then, but he was not ready. And then there was an indication from the inner world, and then Shams shows up. So they were mirrors for each other. They were two people who actually knew who the other person was, and understood each other. Yeah. Yes, Lisa, is that? Yeah.
So you know that radicalism and fundamentalism exists in all religions, in all spheres.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it always seems to be the element that's infused with such tremendous energy in
Yeah.
the form of violence, generally speaking. I'm just curious to get your thoughts on why has Islam, radical Islam, become such a focal point worldwide
Yeah.
right now, at this moment in our history, our human civilization? Do you have any thoughts on why it's happening like this right now with Islam?
Yeah. I think it's like one of those things with perfect storm, So many things aligned for it to happen. I have a friend who who was in the US Navy. He was stationed in Diego Garcia, which is this base out in the Indian Ocean. And for his weekends, he would go to Karachi by himself, stay in a hotel, rent a car, and drive around the city. This was in the 80s, Lisa. Look at that. What has happened in, now, like, even in 30 years or 25 years? I mean, so all we have to do is just go back and just look at that time period. It's not even that far back. So I think it's a lot to do with material forces. It's got a lot to do with multiple interests that are competing. When I was growing up, I remember we had an older cousin who had gone to university, and there was a very small group of students who were part of this Jamaat-e-Islami, this Islamic party. And they used to recruit over there. And that was the first time I remember hearing the word Wahhabi. And it was really almost like a curse word. To say somebody was a Wahhabi at that point, it's like, oh, that person's becoming a Wahhabi. It's like all is lost, So there was a really clear sense that this brand of Islam that was beginning to come out of Saudi Arabia in the early 80s or late 70s, they were starting to be missionary about it, was problematic. But Saudi money has played a huge role in it. Saudi money has been, it's tremendous what they've been able to do because they have set up, and the perfect opening was given by Russia's invasion of Afghanistan. So in order to prepare people to fight, a lot of these madrasas were set up, and the curriculum in those madrasas were a very myopic, truncated version in which a certain brand of Islam was taught. And you basically created a whole group of people, many of whom were simply fighting for their country, and once the Russians left, they went back. But then there was a professional class of fighters who were fighting injustice. And that's when Osama bin Laden was part of it, and he started turning his gaze towards, the West. Even after 9/11, there was a moment when this could have been prevented if we had not gone into Afghanistan and Iraq. We basically, it was amazing to me that it was not obvious, but it's just like, it was like a drunk elephant, somebody has stung and you just want to go and, you could have given 1/1000th of the money to some people in Pakistan and Afghanistan, they would have taken care of everybody. The governments would have done it. All of the money that has been spent, it is unbelievable. It was as if Osama bin Laden wrote a script and we started dancing to it. And the music, everything that he could have wanted, we did. So why did it become a problem? Because partly we made it a problem. We made it a problem. We started creating people who started hating us. There's, if we would just look at drone strikes, for example. It is unbelievable. For all of Obama's goodness and stuff, it is unbelievable what terror he put upon people in Pakistan and Afghanistan, where these drones would hover for hours. Children, John Oliver has a section on drones. It is, in his typical humorous and serious style, it is heartbreaking. He shows the testimony of a young Pakistani boy, from that region, whose grandmother had been killed by a drone strike. He said, "I hate blue skies. I hate blue skies because drones fly in blue skies." So why is radical Islam a problem? It's like, because we made it a problem. Otherwise, and let me give you another example. Since the creation of Pakistan, there has been a religious party called Jamaat-e-Islami. You could bet money that they will always get 5% of the vote. And they would have their kind of bully pulpit and speak about stuff 5%. When was the first time they got a majority in two provinces? Guess. After the invasion of Afghanistan. They ended up being very inept and not very skillful, so they were voted out. Fortunately, democracy ended up working in that case. But look at the direct correlation. For 50 years, this party is no more than 5%. We can absorb 5%. Any society can take care of 5% people who want a certain brand of religiosity, a certain way of life. There's numbers, but all of a sudden then we change the balance and the number starts increasing and it becomes a problem. So we know this, that extremism, in this audience, I think it's obvious that it's not an Islamic problem, it's not a Christian problem, it's a human problem. There's extremists, folks who tend to like to think in black and white terms or are made to act in certain ways. Some of the stuff can be taken care of by taking away these physical, material causes. And when that is taken away and there's no extenuating circumstances, that percentage of population, which is extreme, is small enough to be absorbed by the larger society. We are seeing it happen to us, our own radicals now, on the right and the left. Who did this to us? Nobody, right? I mean, if you look at material forces, so I think radicalism is becoming our problem as well now. And it's an interesting equalizer, you know. Yes?
Well, I just want to thank you for being upfront about that, because I believe our country predominantly has a very glorified mythology about itself, that I occasionally post things about what our government actually does in those countries, and people don't want to look at it. They don't want to see this very ugly side of our culture, and it takes courage, and I just want to thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, yeah. I am going to excuse myself. Thank you all for coming. It's a real pleasure.
We are going to be studying Ruby together.
Yes, I'm going to be learning music from Ishaq.
Thank you very much all for coming, enjoying your evening, and hope we see you all or some of you on July 27th. Bye.